Konami had big plans for the year 2001. It was the year that Yu-Gi-Oh! Would go global, expanding into foreign markets with dubbed versions of Studio Gallup's Duel Monsters anime, localized translations of the original manga, and the first run of promotional cards advertising the series overseas. At home in Japan, there would only be 2 reprint sets this year, but still 4 core expansions and 2 structure decks, finally bringing the card pool up to over 1,000 unique cards, although most of them were just pack filler. After the Metal Raiders reprint set hit in February, the second Yu-Gi-Oh! National Championship was held that March. Wanting to avoid a repeat of the Tokyo Dome riots, Konami took care not to sell any exclusive merchandise at the championship, despite premium packs being available at Jump Festa and other events. Even so, the scale of the 2001 Nationals was bigger than anything before it. The preliminaries consisted of over 4,800 duelists competing at 300 stores across Japan, the winners of which gained entry to one of 7 regional championships, and the top 8 from each regional went on to the national finals at the Tokyo Big Sight Convention Center. Nationals was won by Okamoto Masahiro, whose deck was later reported in V-Jump magazine. His deck consisted of 19 monsters, 15 magic cards, and 6 traps, plus an 11-card side deck. The runner-up at Nationals was Eguchi Yasushi, whose primary strategy was using Ultimate Offering and Witch of the Black Forest. Third place by Takazawa Tomohiro with a Cannon Burn deck, and fourth by Kato Tetsuya. None of these other deck lists were published, but the top 3 duelists all received commemorative prize cards featuring their photographs imposed onto the artwork and effects related to their decks. Okamoto's deck showcases what a typical Good Stuff deck looked like at the time. There isn't a coherent, unified end combo directing the deck's construction. It's a combination of the best cards available, and most of the cards that are at 1 to 2 copies are there either because they're restricted, or because the other copies are sitting in the side deck waiting to get swapped in. Gemini Elves serves as the deck's level 4 beater, Maneater Bug, Penguin Soldier, and Dream Piero as control options, Summoned Demon as the tribute summon endgame, and then you have an assortment of game-changer magic and trap cards like Thunderbolt and Ultimate Offering, plus Draw, Search, and Retrieval from Graceful Charity, Witch of the Black Forest, and Saint Magician. When you sit down to play a deck like this, you are thinking about how to use your search and draw options to dig out specific monsters, but you're also thinking about setting up defense in the form of Messenger of Peace, Magic Jammer, and Feather Duster. At this point, Psycho Shocker was limited to 1, so his absence wasn't exactly unusual for the time period, but it is interesting to note that Okamoto didn't have any Rings of Destruction, while some of the other finalists did. The second national championship was an important moment for Konami, because it was relatively unremarkable. Everything went according to plan. Yu-Gi-Oh! Fever was only growing in 2001, and Konami was working on negotiating a deal to expand overseas into foreign language markets, so the last thing they wanted was a repeat of the first nationals during a time when the bubble hadn't popped yet. At this point, Pokemon had long recovered from the Porygon shocks of 1997, being on the tail end of the gold and silver block of the card game. Monster Collection was already imploding, as they had attempted their disastrous set rotation back in September of the previous year, so many Moncole refugees were fleeing to other games. And Pokemon was Yu-Gi-Oh's biggest rival for absorbing those refugees. Konami needed that win. What nobody needed was their April expansion, Spell of Mask. This set introduced a number of powerful effects like Torrential Tribute, a trap card version of Black Hole that activates in response to a summon, and United We Stand, the most powerful equipped magic card up to that point, granting 800 attack and defense for every face-up monster you control. So long as you had at least 2 monsters out, it was better than a Demon's Axe. There was also a Magic Trap Zone equivalent to United We Stand, Power of Mages, and a quick play removal card Offering to the Dead that destroyed a face-up monster in exchange for skipping your next draw phase. However, all of these cards were trivial compared to Card of Safe Return, a permanent magic card that caused you to draw a card every time a monster was special summoned from your graveyard, turning every revival effect from a neutral exchange to a +1. Revival effects weren't that prominent at the time, so you couldn't just throw it into Good Stuff, and players built dedicated Safe Return combo decks instead. This resulted in Safe Return Exodia, the next one-turn kill deck. How Safe Return Exodia worked was that you would first get stuff into the graveyard with Graceful Charity or Painful Choice, then play Card of Safe Return, then use Premature Burial or Monster Reborn to start drawing off of Safe Return. Your one normal summon would be Cannon Soldier, who would blow up the revived monsters. Ideally, you would revive Witch of the Black Forest or Critter so you could use their search effects to tutor Exodia pieces to hand. Any additional cards of Safe Return you played would stack, so that you could draw 2 or 3 cards off of each revival, and you could also thin the deck with Thunder Dragons and bounce Premature Burial back to hand with Hurricane so you could cast it again and draw 2 or 3 more cards. Some crazy people actually ran Hand Obliteration, but then they risked losing Exodia pieces, so to compensate for that, they'd have to set Backup Soldier and activate it after passing to the opponent to get those pieces back in hand and win the game. In general, Safe Return Exodia aims to win on the very first turn, but passing wasn't the end of the world unless it was against another Safe Return Exodia, in which case the mirror match was basically just competitive coin flipping. A variant emerged soon after called Cure Burn, which cut out the Exodia pieces and ran Big Bang Girl instead, a new effect monster from Spell of Mask that burned the opponent for 500 LP every time her controller gained life. So they'd use that draw power to dig through their deck for heals like Dian Keto and build up incredible life totals while burning the opponent down to nothing. Cure Burn had a lot of tools to work with, like a trap card called Blessing of the Holy Elf that healed you 300 points for each monster in play. At the time, it was ruled that every instance of 300 was a separate heal, so if you got 5 monsters onto the field, Big Bang Girl would proc 5 times and burn the opponent for 2500, up to a maximum of 7500 if you set 3 blessings. The resolution of Blessing was later changed in one of the rule revisions so that the heal happened all at once, making this no longer possible in the modern game. April also brought with it Limited Edition 3, a mail order pack of cards available through Weekly Shonen Jump magazine that came in 3 versions: Yugi, Jonochi, and Kaiba, each pack containing 3 fixed cards. This type of mail order pack had been done before, both in Yu-Gi-Oh! And in other games like Pokemon, but Limited Edition 3 was the first time the contents were highly competitive. In particular, the Jonochi pack introduced one of the most powerful magic cards in the game, Scapegoat. Scapegoat was a card from the manga that summoned 4 token monsters, a mechanic new to Yu-Gi-Oh! Where pieces from outside the game were used to represent a monster created during the game itself. The sheep tokens would be summoned in defense mode and had 0 attack and defense, and could not be sacrificed for a tribute summon, and the effect of Scapegoat also stopped you from summoning other monsters during the turn it was cast. However, because it was a quick play magic card, you could cast it on your opponent's turn to get around that limitation, joining Call of the Living Dead and the Recruiter monsters in an exclusive club of cards that could summon during the opponent's turn. Scapegoat made many decks resistant to beatdown, as the only ways of inflicting piercing damage were through relatively weak cards like Mad Sword Beast and Meteor Strike, so one going off could steal the tempo of a game from beatdown in an instant. At the time, this was effectively seen as gaining life points, since you were just summoning 4 defensive walls, but other use cases for Scapegoat quickly emerged. You could sacrifice them to Cannon Soldier for a 2000 point burn, use them with United We Stand for a 3200 attack point buff, potentially a 4000 point one with another monster out, and ultimately they would become targets for level manipulation mechanics that needed level 1 monsters. The Yugi pack brought in another manga card, Spirit Mirror, localized as Mystical Ref Panel internationally. This was a trap capable of transferring a magic effect from one player to another, which could be used to steal the draws from Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity, or to bounce the discard effect of Delinquent Duo and Confiscation back to the opponent, along with a number of other uses. The fact that it specifically only worked on effects that targeted a single player resulted in some complexity to whether or not it could be played at all, as effects that targeted both players weren't applicable, and also resulted in numerous unpredictable interactions. A decade later, a combo would be discovered with Into the Void, which allowed you to draw a card if you had 3 or more in hand, in exchange for discarding your entire hand during the end phase. Players would use Into the Void and chain Spirit Mirror to it to reflect their own magic card's effect onto the opponent and force the opponent to discard their hand. May 2001 brought with it a new ban list. At this time, Safe Return Exodia was the more popular deck of the format because it was less dependent on traps, while Cure Burn had a big weakness to Psycho Shocker and Good Stuff struggled with the Exodia matchup. Neither Safe Return decks were as consistent as Last Will Exodia, but the fact that Spell of Mask had generated 2 OTKs that could both go off on the first turn was controversial. So of course, the May ban list hit United We Stand. Wait, what? Yeah, Konami limited United We Stand because apparently Maha Vilo is too strong for this world, moved Chaos Pod and Backup Soldier from limited to semi-limited, unlimited Last Will, and touched nothing else. Bear in mind, Last Will's text hasn't actually changed, it's just been turned into a normal magic card by the splitting of all the magic cards into normal, continuous, and quick play. Now, the real reason United We Stand was hit was, probably, because of its combo potential with Scapegoat. But that wasn't what players were worried about. Bumping Backup Soldier up from 1 to 2 made safe return Exodia a lot safer, and unlimiting Last Will greatly strengthened both Exodia and Big Bang Burn decks. A number of Japanese players refer to this as the beginning of another dark age for the game, because Exodia's first turn kill potential was too stable, and Konami would not modify the ban list again until the end of Series 2 a year later, resulting in an 8-month-long solitaire format. During this period, there were not a lot of high-impact additions to the card pool, although there were some reprints in the form of the Yugi and Jonochi structure decks, which included single copies of many staples like Pot of Greed, Graceful Charity, Backup Soldier, Ultimate Offering, and Scapegoat, among others. And while the OCG format was in this period of stagnation, Monster Collection imploded on itself in the aftermath of its first rotation. Pokemon adopted its new card backs and started a gradual collapse that would take years for it to recover from. And the Digimon Hyper Coliseum card game was booming off the back-to-back success of the Digimon Adventure and Adventure 02 anime series, having just broken out of an oppressive lockdown format with a new wave of cards that were uniquely immune to specific control effects. Surprisingly, Bandai had become Konami's strongest domestic rival, although as Konami expanded overseas, they would quickly surpass the Digimon card game on a global scale, and the Japanese tabletop market as a whole was on the brink of a recession that would take about 3 years to clear up. The 6th core set of Series 2, Labyrinth of Nightmare, dropped on July 21st. The theme of this set was built around Bakura's occult deck from the Battle City arc of the manga, including his signature cards Dark Necrofear and Ouija Board. These cards were flavorful and had mechanically interesting effects, which is to say they were very, very bad. The main stars, as far as the players were concerned, were original cards that had nothing to do with the manga or the anime. Dark Hero Zombire was a 4-star beater with 2100 attack that was unable to attack players directly, and every time it destroyed a monster by battle, its strength would drop 200 points. So it was weaker than Goblin Attack Force with less of a drawback in exchange, but even after one reduction, still tied with Gemini Elf, making it last more turns and enabling 1-for-2 exchanges, or allowing Zombire to survive the opponent's turn and be tributed for Summoned Demon or Psycho Shocker after that. Zombire was also a fusion component in another powerful monster, the Last Warrior from Another Planet, which when special summoned destroyed all other monsters you controlled and blocked both players from summoning any more monsters. While Last Warrior had no immunity to magic or trap-based removal, it was possible to special summon it outside traditional fusion, through Devil Franken, and while the opponent could still set monsters against it, they could not flip summon or tribute summon. The only way those monsters could turn face up was by being attacked by Last Warrior, so the number of monsters that could seriously affect it was small, mainly consisting of the various pots and pods in the game. Rounding out the key monsters was Bazoo the Soul Eater, a 1600 attack 4-star that, once per turn, could banish up to 3 cards from the graveyard to increase its attack by 300 points for every card removed. This buff would last until the end of the opponent's turn, and allowed Bazoo to alternate between 1900 and 2500 attack on any given turn, strong enough to slay Psycho Shocker and stalemate with the Summoned Demon. While it was hard to sustain that banishment cost long term at this point, you really only needed Bazoo for 1 turn as an answer to Psycho Shocker that wasn't named DD Warrior. From the set's traps was Royal Command, a continuous trap card that negated the activation and effects of all flip monsters. As a successor to Imperial Order, Royal Command was useful for siding against flip effects, specifically mill cards like Cyberpod, Metamorpot, and Chaos Pod. And that was pretty much it, at least on launch. 53 cards minted, and just 4 of them were actually played. Most of the set's contents would not find a use until much later, when it was long out of print. Cards like Jogen the Spiritualist and Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer that had powerful individual effects like blocking all special summons, but didn't have much of a role in a format dominated by Exodia and Burn. The big gimmick of the set, Ouija Board, was completely unplayable when it first came out because it was an alternate win condition that required you to first activate a continuous trap card and then spend 4 turns placing 4 specific cards from your deck in order, with all of them leaving the field if even one of them got hit with any kind of removal, in a format where most of your opponents were aiming to win on the very first turn they got. Safe Return Exodia had something in the ballpark of a 50% chance to win every time it took a turn, and you were supposed to somehow last through 5 of those? Yeah, not happening. That July also marked the launch of Duel Monsters 5 Expert 1. This was the first rules-accurate Yu-Gi-Oh game, including every card up through Curse of Anubis, and while it inherited most of the gameplay modes of its predecessors, including a campaign where you defeated each opponent a certain number of times to advance to the next stage, it also introduced a new in-game calendar system where different events would happen on different days of the week, getting copies of Weekly Shonen Jump every Tuesday with promo packs, V-Jump magazine on the 21st of each month with its own promos, weekend best of 3 duels, anti-matches with rare hunters, and tournaments twice a year consisting of multiple rounds with special prize cards. This was the second trading card game on the Game Boy Advance after Mega Man Battle Network, and in terms of its feature set, it was one of the better TCG video games of the time, up there with Koto Battle on the Game Boy Color, Magic the Gathering for the Dreamcast, and Digimon Digital Card Arena on the PlayStation. It didn't have a world you could actually walk around in like Pokemon Card GB or SNK vs. Capcom, but it was a more simulation-driven game that was trying to replicate the basic elements of a lifestyle hobby in digital form. And while the card pool wasn't caught up to the real game, this was probably for the best, because the Curse of Anubis meta was more fun to play than what was current. Konami had made the real game worse, and players could use the digital game to dip back into a better time. Despite its advancements, releasing very early in the life of the Game Boy Advance, and eventually seeing a worldwide release as the Eternal Duelist Soul, Duel Monsters 5 actually indicated a dip in popularity for Konami. The game still sold 1.7 million copies and became the 20th best-selling Game Boy Advance game of all time, but this was roughly half of what its predecessors Duel Monsters 4, 3, and Forbidden Memories sold, and was built from global sales rather than just Japanese. In Japan, Duel Monsters 5 only moved 410,000 units life to date, about 16% of what Duel Monsters 4 did, and subsequent Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games would see a gradual decline in Japan while rising in popularity overseas, before tapering off worldwide around 2004 and becoming just another video game series rather than a massive omnipresent phenomena. The last Yu-Gi-Oh! Game to break 1 million copies sold was Duel Monsters International, known outside Japan as Worldwide Edition Stairway to the Destined Duel. While it would be some time before the phenomena was exhausted, these figures served as canaries in the coal mine, showing that the brand was not going to dominate forever. September dropped another game on players, the sequel to Forbidden Memories, Yu-Gi-Oh! Shin Duel Monsters 2 Inherited Memories. This one was an exceptionally weird spin-off that didn't even resemble the real game, with the player moving their monsters around an 8x8 grid like in a strategy RPG, and a story based around the historical War of the Roses. But it made one important contribution to the OCG, Newt, which was Gemini Elf but better. 1900 attack plus a flip effect that raised its attack and defense by 500 points, and a separate effect that debuffed any monster that destroyed it in battle by 500 in every stat. This meant that even if you never set it and only summoned a Newt face up, if it was destroyed by battle, it would still weaken the opponent's monster, instantly bringing even high-end monsters like Psycho Shocker and the Summoned Demon down to a level where 4-star beaters could slay them. People didn't really use Newt for the flip effect because 900 defense wouldn't be enough for it to survive and use the attack buff, and instead summoned it face up right away since the debuff served as an incentive not to attack it. It was undeniably the strongest 4-star monster of Series 2, and it wasn't reprinted until it was already irrelevant in 2006, so I'm sure whoever at Konami thought of printing this promo received a promo of their own, and a raise. That was a joke, everybody knows Konami pays its employees in store credit. Anyway, people were mad about this, not just because Konami was once again printing staple cards exclusively as promos, but because they were also power creeping the card they had just done that to, Vorse Raider. When you are a competitive player aiming to win the National or Asia or World Championship, you will pay anything to have the perfect deck. And Konami knew this and said, okay, buy this video game 3 times. This wasn't an oversight or a mistake, it was just evil. Intentionally bad design, done to squeeze blood from the stones, and Konami waited until Inherited Memories was out of print in May 2002 to finally limit Newt. Before then, if you were playing good stuff, then you needed Newt to win the mirror match, or else your Gemini Elves would lose to the opponent's Newt instead. But let's be clear, you weren't really playing good stuff in September 2001, because the next ban list was still 4 months off. You were playing Exodia or Burn. Compared to the first turn kill decks being allowed to run around unchecked, Newt being a promo was just another nuisance. The 7th core set of Series 2, Struggle of Chaos, launched on the 20th and marked a major change for the OCG. It was the first set to not adapt any new cards from the anime or manga, instead featuring a wholly original set of cards that tried to convey a line of continuous stories through their illustrations. As a whole, the set focused on 3 warring monster types: warriors, fiends, and dragons. The warrior type cards included Reinforcement of the Army, the Warrior Returning Alive, and Exiled Force. Reinforcement of the Army was a simple 1-for-1 magic card that tutored a level 4 lower warrior to your hand from your deck, which was often used to search different Dimension Warrior or Zombire, and the Warrior Returning Alive added a warrior type monster from your graveyard to your hand. It wasn't level restricted, so you could use it with cards like Premature Burial to search anything Reinforcement couldn't touch. Exiled Force was a 4-star monster that could be tributed to destroy any monster on the field, and is sometimes said to be the beginning of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks because of its high searchability, ease of use, and inherent utility. Prior to this, people ran Dream PRO for control, but Exiled Force was live as soon as you drew it, and was easily searched by Critter, Reinforcement of the Army, or Giant Rat. And once it was in the graveyard, it turned all resurrection cards into removal cards. Monster Reborn and Premature Burial became instant access to Exiled Force, like a costless tribute to the doomed. As a result, Exiled Force continued to see play all the way into early 2007 in the middle of Series 5. The standout dragon of the set was Death Demon Dragon, a fusion monster that couldn't use any substitutes for its fusion, no goddess with the third eye allowed. Its effect negated all monster flip effects and negated and destroyed any traps that targeted it. While on the surface, only being able to fusion summon it through those specific monsters sounds too restrictive, in reality that requirement didn't apply if it wasn't fusion summoned in the first place. By using Devil Franken to special summon it, you could bypass those limitations and completely shut down the opponent's flip effects, without needing to set Royal Command. Up to this point, Devil Franken usage was on the decline, but the introduction of a monster that could totally shut down Mill breathed new life into it. What players would do is use Devil Franken for Thousand Eyes Sacrifice normally. Then, if they discovered they were playing against a Mill deck, summon Death Demon Dragon instead. Since Franken was easily searched through recruiter monsters, Good Stuff now had an effective strategy for counteracting Mill. All they needed was for Card of Safe Return to get hit, and Good Stuff would get the good times back. The big fiend out of Struggle of Chaos was Majin Dark Balter, a fusion of Possessed Blood Soul and Frontier Wise Man. Like Death Demon Dragon, Dark Balter did not accept any substitutes for its fusion materials. Its first effect allowed the controller to pay 1,000 life points when a normal magic card was activated to negate that effect, and its second effect negated the effects of any monster it destroyed by battle. So Balter could shut down cards like Pot of Greed, Delinquent Duo, and Thunderbolt, and also stop monsters like Newt and Maneater Bug, but it was totally powerless against trap cards, quick play, and equip magic cards like Snatch Steal. Its first effect could only be used twice in most situations because you generally turned to Devil Franken to get it out, and that Snatch Steal vulnerability was especially important because if the opponent snatched control of Balter, then you just paid 5,000 LP to give them one of the strongest monsters in the game. The weakness to traps also meant that a single Ring of Destruction could easily win the duel. Even so, shutting down normal magic and effect monsters was very strong, to the point that the card retained some playability all the way into the 2010s. In its own time, Balter was known for shutting down recruiter monsters like Critter and Killer Tomato, as well as nullifying different Dimension Warrior. For purely shutting down flip effects, it was inferior to Death Demon Dragon, but it was more versatile and that led to a lot of usage in the OCG. There were a lot of other decent cards to come out of Struggle of Chaos, like Spear Dragon, Emergency Rations, and Super Rejuvenation, but they didn't see much play because of the format being so Exodia heavy. Exiled Force was probably the most important, as a searchable general-purpose removal card, and the enhancements to Good Stuff meant that if Card of Safe Return were not in the card pool, it probably would have been a conventional beatdown-centric format. Unfortunately, what happened next was really the end of beatdown as a deck. The Dark Ages were about to get a whole lot darker, thanks to the introduction of the worst, most vile, most degenerate monster Yu-Gi-Oh! Has ever printed, Yatagarasu.